Hello and welcome back to the Backlot bonus episode for the Backlot box office. Again, I've got Derrick with me here. We decided that what we're going to do whenever we're talking about certain things that are in the box office going on, we want to have a little bit of extra nugget going on here. This week, thanks to the return of Michael Myers to the big screen, we have got a little bit of Blumhouse to talk about here today. Just mainly because if anybody doesn't realize that the new quote unquote reboot of the Halloween franchise is a Blumhouse production. So this week here, we decided we want to talk a little bit of Blumhouse and kind of see what they're giving us over these last few years.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about horror movies in theaters, I mean, Blumhouse is one of the big brands, certainly a company that can just sell properties based on their name alone. And
Hmm.
since the Halloween franchise is a big part of that for them these days, I figured let's just go into a deep dive here and just kind of see what has been the best performing movies at the box office for Blumhouse over their roughly decade or so as a horror force to be reckoned with at the box office.
Yeah,
So
and what I find fascinating, just before we get started here, is the fact, like you said, Blumhouse has been around for like a better part of a decade here.
yeah,
But it seems that only in the last few years that they've really started to grab the name where, when you think of a Blumhouse production, because like, there's names that are on this list that unbeknownst to me, I never realized were even Blumhouse productions up until the last couple of years. So, they're really starting to say, hey, you know what? By the way, we make really good movies and here's where we can prove that.
yeah, and even when you have the occasional movie where they will actually just put Blumhouse in the title, like last year, Blumhouse's Fantasy Island or Blumhouse's Truth or Dare, neither of which are necessarily good movies, but certainly they decided to throw that name in there to see if audiences would come out. And to an extent, they have. So
Yeah. And you also kind of have to wonder though too, is that if it wasn't for Blumhouse, are some of these movies, would they ever get made? Is he, Jason Blum does seem like the kind of producer that is willing to take those chances,
yeah,
and get those movies made. So
yeah,
on that here, the first thing we wanted to talk about is the top 5 opening weekends for Blumhouse productions. And so here, take it away, Derek.
sure. So the top one, and this, of course, this is part of the reason why I kind of want to throw this out as a topic, is because the top Blumhouse opening weekend of all time is the 2018 Halloween,
Hmm.
which made 76.22 million back in October of 2018. I mean, that was a movie that had a lot of hype around it. That was kind of tying in with the 40th anniversary of the Halloween franchise.
Yep.
Certainly, they were touting the whole, we have Jamie Lee Curtis back, we have John Carpenter back, as a producer and as the writer of the score. We have David Gordon Green and Danny McBride. They're putting their own vibe on this franchise. So certainly a lot of elements that garnered it a lot of publicity. And of course, optimal timing because this came out also in that mid-October timeframe, just like
Yep.
Halloween Kills did. So it really exploded right out of the gate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think, I think it was a little bit of mix of all of that, to be honest, because like you said, I mean, the fact we had Jamie Lee Curtis, the fact that we had, John Carpenter, so we had the solid foundation for a Halloween film and whatnot. But then you go in, you get into the Seth Rogen camp of Danny McBride and Gordon, Green, and like those are the ones where like I wanted to see it because that's what the part of it that intrigued me the most.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I've seen maybe like 2 or 3 Halloweens out of all these movies out of 40 years, but it was me going, Danny McBride is making a Halloween movie, and after the aspect of Jordan Peele going, you know what, I can do horror too. Watch this. I was like, all right, you have my attention. And the first one, this one here, Danny McBride and production and everybody, they did not disappoint. I think this is if and it was a very well just deserved production.
Yeah, and the other thing too is what they were talking about a lot that time, which is like, okay, this is just a direct sequel to the 1978 Halloween. We're going to ignore everything else that came
Hmm.
before it. Everything from the original Halloween 2 to the Rob Zombies. We're starting scratch. You only just have to watch the original Halloween as an entry point, and then you're good to go. which I think also helped a lot too.
Definitely. Definitely.
All right. Number two on the list is kind of like the original franchise that really made Blumhouse who they are. This is Paranormal Activity 3, which made $52.57 million in October of 2011. For those of you who can't tell apart your paranormal activities just based on the title alone, this is the one
Me.
that's set in the 80s, with the dad that has the camcorder, and the two little girls, and the whole VHS tape look. So certainly that's the one that probably had, of all the sequels, that's the one that had the biggest hook to it. And certainly that paid off in spades at the box office. This is also the one directed by the guys who did the Catfish movie back in 2010, and then
Okay.
also went on to do Nerve after this. So definitely have some talent there behind the camera as well. And also Christopher Landon, the guy who went on to do other Blumhouse movies like The Happy Death Days and Freaky, he wrote this sequel too. So
Nice. So I mean, again, a good pairing of people to make a good solid movie. Granted,
yeah,
I'm still trying to wrap my head around going from Catfish to Paranormal Activity to Nerve. But I mean, it just goes to show the kind of range that somebody has when you do something like that.
yeah, yeah. And then number three, we talked about it on the other show, Halloween Kills, getting pretty close to Paranormal Activity 3,
Mhm.
only 2 million or so behind it. So, the fact that, it performed as strongly as it did, certainly means that this franchise is still a major player for
Mhm.
Blumhouse. And I'll be very curious where Halloween ends up on this list when it comes out 1 year from now.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree because I mean, if you figure if it weren't for the pushback, the pandemic, everything like that, obviously Halloween Kills would have easily had overtaken Paranormal Activity 3. Um, and who knows how it would have compared possibly to the original 2018 Halloween. I would be kind of curious, but I agree. Trying to see where hopefully we'll be in a better place this time next year.
Yep.
That we're gonna get at least at minimum. Halloween Ends is going to be right there, at least on par. I'm gonna probably put it somewhere between one and two. You know, um, in terms of that because I think that they should easily be able to pull off that ending.
Yeah. And of course, Jason Blum has already gone on record saying, like, yep, Halloween Ends, that is strictly going to be a theatrical release. But, when he explained his rationale for why he wanted Halloween Kills on Peacock as well in the first place. So it'll do
Yeah,
just fine. It'll do just
yeah,
fine.
I agree.
Number four, another Paranormal Activity. This is the second one, which made 40.68 million in October 2010. So again, this is just building off the hype, because the first movie in the franchise that was kind of like a leggier movie, one that audiences slowly came out to, and it kind of built up that hype for that original movie. And then of course this movie just went everywhere at once in its first weekend for the sequel, and so everybody just showed up. So, um, but anyway, it's interesting that you see two Paranormal Activity movies in this list that did very well back in the day. And so
Hmm.
it is a little bit surprising that, in a couple weekends, we're going to have a new Paranormal Activity movie, but that is strictly going to be a streaming exclusive on
Right.
Paramount Plus. So I don't know
Do-
if it would have been good to maybe try that one out in theaters just to see, if that franchise still had some gas in it at the box office, but we'll never know.
Yeah, that is a very, very strong question. Is Paramount's take on what their response to the paranormal. This words are hard when it says try to say paranormal activity. Um, is wondering, what the rationale was that other than just the Paramount wants to use the legs of this franchise to help push their streaming service, more so than worrying about what they were going to get at the box office. Because I completely agree with you. I'm sort of kind of baffled by that streaming only service or release for Paranormal Activity.
Yeah, because that's certainly a type of movie that really benefits from watching that in a theater with an audience, listening to the mostly silent soundtrack. I mean, you have your youthful high school aged audience in there who's freak out at the slightest noise.
Hmm.
It makes for, I mean, some people might be annoyed by that type of experience, but I've kind of enjoyed it. But again, you know, that's the choice that Paramount Plus made. Rely on that Paranormal Activity brand name. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it weird, but I think that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So number 5, Glass.
Yes. Yes. So the closest thing that Blumhouse will ever have to a comic book franchise managed to eke it out onto this list. 40.33 million in January of 2019. Again, this is a movie that had a lot of hype going into it because the end of Split, people freaking out that this is connected to Unbreakable, and then M. Night goes, "Yeah, we're going to combine both of those movies into a shared sequel," and people like me were losing their minds over it. So
I was all
you can
over it.
definitely, yeah. So definitely, a lot of people just wanted to see what the heck that kind of movie was going to be. So
Yeah, and I'm kind of just looking at these numbers. I'm kind of sad to see that Paranormal Activity just squeaked ever so slightly, in front of it here, being that we're talking almost 10 years difference here. That Glass couldn't just squeak by another $500,000.
yeah, the one thing I will mention is Glass did open on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend,
Mm,
so it did have a stronger Monday. That definitely probably took some money out of the weekend itself. But again, still a very good performance for a movie that nobody would have ever seen coming, just a few years ago. So
no, not at all. I even remember when Breakable came out. He's like, "This picture that this movie is a one of 3 movies in a trilogy, and I'm never gonna make the other two." That's what he said when
yep.
Unbreakable first came out, and all of a sudden Split's like, "Oh hey, by the way."
What a twist.
Yeah, that's not M Night's thing at all. So going on past that here, we decided that hey, let's talk a little bit of the domestic grosses. What really has Blumhouse really done for us here? So here we have the top 5 domestic gross movies for Blumhouse.
Yeah. And number one, you'll notice is a movie that we haven't talked about at all yet, which is
No.
Get Out, which made $176 million. This is a movie that truly had legs because it opened
Yes.
around like 33 million, but obviously the word of mouth on this was really, really good. It just coasted through that February and March timeframe as more and more audiences found it. And
Mm-hmm.
then it even got a bit of a box office boost later on when we got to awards season, and as it started getting nominated for major awards, got nominated for Best Picture, theaters started bringing it back, and it added a few more $1 million to its coffer there. So that really worked out all in its favor. And again, shows that, word of mouth can still carry a movie these days. It's not just about the opening weekend, but it's also just like how long it does overall. And Get Out certainly benefited from that.
Yes, and it also goes to show that a comedian can make a horror R or an R-rated horror thriller movie, and it'd be really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
And
yeah,
and speaking of comedians making more movies that are horror movies, you got
yeah,
Halloween.
yeah. Halloween, $159.37 million. Again, it really kind of just stormed the box office in those 2 weeks leading up to Halloween a few years ago.
Mhm.
Again, we talked about all the hype around it. It certainly paid off well. Certainly justified Blumhouse's decision to like, yeah, we're just gonna greenlight 2 sequels right away, and that's almost kind of becoming the modus operandi for Blumhouse because you might recall a few months ago they announced, "Hey, we're just going to do another sequel trilogy right off the bat for The Exorcist." And we're not even just going to step around like we're just going to make one sequel. We're going to announce 3 of them in one fell swoop, which is insane, but when you have numbers like the Halloween 2018 gross behind it and you can make it fairly low budget as is the Blumhouse model, that just pays for itself immediately. So
Right. Yeah, it's very fascinating just to see how Blumhouse does that, where they're like, our model is make it cheap, but still make it good. You know,
yeah.
80% of the time.
Yeah. So number three, speaking again of M Night, Split made $138 million back in January of 2017. Again, not unlike Get Out, this is a movie that really kind of had that kind of legs on it because again, this is back during the period when M Night was still really reestablishing himself, because at this
Mm-hmm.
point he had made The Visit, which had done
Okay.
okay, but was kind of like, baked into the whole like found footage thing that Paranormal Activity kind of kicked off. But Split certainly caught a lot of people's attention, as word grew around of like, yeah, you've got to see this James McAvoy performance. It's truly a tour de force. Or the word of mouth of, you won't believe how this movie ends, because, we just talked about it. So
Yeah.
certainly a lot of stuff that, really helped and kind of grew that word, and ultimately justified its follow up Glass, which is at number 4 as well with 111. So
Yeah, this is the part where M Night is like, this is why I put up my own money, because then I'll make some more money on the back end when I get done, because I'm making movies that are making this much money.
exactly, and that's, again, the interesting partnership that M. Night and Blumhouse kind of carved out. And
Hmm.
it should be noted that, Old was the first M. Night movie where he didn't put it through Blumhouse. He just set up a direct deal with Universal. In the same fashion, Jordan Peele kind of got away from Blumhouse once Get Out and Black Klansman came out, and he just went directly to Universal for Us and Candyman and next summer's Nope. So it's interesting to see Blumhouse is kind of a stepping stone for these auteurs to kind of gain their footing, so to speak, and become big powerhouse entities in their own right.
Well, and yeah, kind of like what I said before too. And part of me feels bad for Blumhouse, because if that is the case, be like, you're just our stepping stone to get to where we actually want to be. But at the same time too, Blumhouse is also going, you know what? You guys want to make this movie. The studios aren't going to let you make the movie, so I'll help you get the movie made, and then we'll get somebody
Yeah.
like Universal to distribute it. But you know, you hope that maybe at some point here that they're like, hey, we want to stick to Blumhouse, because clearly we have a good working relationship.
Yeah. And then rounding out the list, this time it's the original Paranormal Activity from September of 2009. This made $107.92 million. Again, this was very much a slow growing phenomenon.
Hmm.
Certainly, again, another movie that really benefited from that long term word of mouth. You know, people understanding, what the concept of this movie is, what the gimmick is behind the movie. You know, seeing it with those packed audiences originally, and then telling their friends to watch it. There's a reason this became, a powerhouse franchise that's about to enter its 7th movie. Again, even though it's on Paramount Plus, the fact that it has still been a sustaining brand, for now 12 years,
Hmm.
really brings back to that credit of what the first movie did so well way back when.
Well, and what this actually means, that especially what we've talked about previously, and what this kind of shows me, which is curious to me, is that we listed part two and part three as two of the biggest box office openers for Blumhouse, and yet the original here is the one that had the legs to give it the longevity of the overall domestic gross.
Yep.
So it's fascinating to see. It's that the first one here, it had the legs to get through the long haul. Those first ones, it almost feels like is like everybody that wanted to go see it saw it like those maybe like those first couple weeks, and then just kind of dropped off.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, not unlike what we talked about with Halloween, Blumhouse had kind of set up Paranormal Activity as that Halloween, like weekend before Halloween foundation. It kind of
Hmm.
took the place of what Saw was doing the
Hmm.
previous years, where it's like, this is the movie we're putting out every Halloween. You're going to get a new installment, really establishing itself there. And that it just became an event, which is why you really
Right.
get that front loading in the opening weekend.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious as to what that next like quote unquote franchise is going to be after, basically in 2 years from now, because next year it's going to be Halloween Ends.
Yep.
As that franchise movie, or what is 2023 going to bring us for the franchise Halloween movie that's going to be that repetition like Saw
What?
was.
Well, that's going to be The Exorcist. That has the October 2023 date. So
Okay.
that's what they're going to do for that.
What is the stuff that's supposed to be going to streaming along with the Exorcist stuff? Isn't there supposed to be streaming stuff to go along with it?
Yeah, so October 2023 is going to be the first new Exorcist movie. The way that Jason Blum kind of touted is that will be truly be theatrical only. But then they were talking about the sequels, either dating on Peacock or just debuting strictly on Peacock. So that might change. We'll see. But at
That
least
might change.
initially, that's what they announced.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say maybe that'll change depending on how well this 2023 Exorcist does.
yeah, we'll see.
All right, so on to the next thing here, and that we want to kind of go over with Blumhouse here is the franchises in general, because well, they have their hands in a few franchises, like we've said here. These are the top 5 franchises under the Blumhouse umbrella.
Yeah. So again, we've talked a lot about Paranormal Activity, and they certainly have topped the list with a little over $400 million over the first 6 movies between 2009 and 2015. Again, probably it's just the quantity of how many movies have made it out there.
Hmm.
But certainly, they had an impact and they just couldn't stop making those back in the day. So that's why they're there. So we'll see
Hmm.
ultimately if they decide to take it back to theaters or not. But for now, it's far and away the king. So,
Right.
and then number 2 is another one of their more durable franchises. One we haven't really talked about yet because they've been a little bit more of moderate performers. It's The Purge, which has had 5 movies so far, including this summer's The Forever Purge.
Hmm.
And we're just under $265 million on that thus far. Um, you know, and who knows, they might keep going with that because, The Forever Purge did pretty well all
It
told.
did pretty decent.
Yeah.
For me, it's probably the Forever Purge probably wasn't the strongest of the 5 films, but I mean, it still wasn't hurting.
No, and people still, yeah, people definitely still shut up for it. So, I can't begrudge that in any sense. And of course, that's not even counting the other things they've done with that, like the USA Network TV series that they did a
Right.
couple seasons of. So it definitely still is a durable name that will draw people out. And if
Hmm.
they can, and if they would dare kind of keep leaning into that Fourth of July quasi patriotic vibe of the Purge movies, as insane as that sounds, they could keep that going. So
No, no, I agree. I think one of the things that the Purge has going for it is that it does push on that socio, economic and all of that political aspect of it that other films are kind of sort of maybe afraid to touch sometimes. Um,
yeah,
so
yeah, it still gives it that buzz. So
exactly, exactly. And then crazy, creepy, little possessed kids. Is this what Sidious is?
yeah, yeah, yeah. From the James Wan universe, because he did actually make movies for Blumhouse before he just set up shop at Warner Brothers for the last decade.
Hmm.
So $257.56 million over the course of 4 films. Um, I'm still pretty convinced that this is a franchise that isn't dead yet. We'll
Yep.
see what happens, but they could keep that going if they wanted to. It certainly has the power in its name to bring people in as it of itself. So,
Oh, definitely.
and then number 4, because technically Split and Glass, they're 2/3 of a franchise, at least under the Blumhouse umbrella. I had to throw that in here as well. So that's at $249 million between the 2 movies. Again, kind of surprising. It's a franchise you didn't expect, but it's one that made its mark very quickly while it lasted. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say, and no, after originally having M Night basically tell me how many years ago that Unbreakable was that comic book movie that was not going to have the sequels ever made. You know, I don't trust M Night to tell me that this is the end of the East Rail trilogy. Like like I picture him going, oh, by the way, here's the other twist.
yeah.
So even with this one here, I wouldn't even necessarily count this one dead yet.
Yeah, or he might just pull the other trick of like his next movie might end with like grown up Haley Joel Osment showing up or some other wild thing like that. Who knows? Who knows?
Yep,
Anything's possible with him. So,
exactly.
and then wrapping up the list for now is Halloween, which as of this weekend with Halloween Kills, it's just under $210 million. Certainly, if we were to come back in a few weeks once Halloween Kills wraps up, it might be all the way up to number 2 on this list. We'll definitely have to wait and see. And certainly once Halloween Ends comes out, it'll certainly get very close to that number one spot. We'll just have to see. But again, for a franchise that's one movie and 1 weekend into a second movie, to do this well on the list, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, and the other thing, again, I look at this here, and I keep having to say over and over in my brain here is the fact that Blumhouse is willing to give some of these filmmakers chances that I don't think the big studios are willing to take that risk, because you said with like Insidious, this is where James Wan went after essentially after the success of Saw, but I mean he was still working on low budget stuff and whatnot. Danny McBride going, hey, you know what? I want to make a new Halloween movie. M Night's still trying to get his footing and whatnot.
yeah,
Um, I had to pull up his name because it was escaping me here, but James Delmonico
Monica. Yep.
that does The Purge, I
Yep.
mean, prior to the Purge movies, he really wasn't, known for a whole lot. But like, hey, I have this idea, and I imagine something like if you look at that very first Purge movie, there's probably a few studios that were like, I think we're gonna pass because they probably just didn't want to touch that. There's a lot of tone to that first home invasion movie of his.
Yep. So
Definitely.
yeah, and then there's all the other franchises they have that didn't even make it onto this list, like the Sinister movies, the Ouija movies, the Happy Death Day movies. Definitely a lot of other stuff they've got, in the lower rungs, that, and certainly one of those might pop into the next franchise. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Give me another Happy Death Day.
Make another Freaky, turn that into a franchise.
Thank you. I would take Freaky 2 any day of the week. Give me more. Give me more Vince Vaughn.
Yep.
All right. So that is us talking about some Blumhouse. So definitely we appreciate all your time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We definitely want to hear from everybody. Again, my name is Brian Mensing with the Backlot 605, and as always, joining me, Derrick Veurink.
Hey.
Again, so we appreciate you guys, and have a great day.
See you next week.